The rain came sideways that night, hard, personal. The kind that found every crack and reminded a man the desert owed him nothing. A lantern cut through the dark behind the barn. He walked it steady, rifle low. He had heard the thrashing once. The second time he did not wait. The mare was tangled in 3 strands of wire. Neck, leg, flank, blood mixed with rain on her hide. But the paint held him still, red and black, precise lines and river patterns across her shoulder. Not a brand any cattleman would draw. The kind that marked a horse for war. She trembled, the wire creaked. One more pull and the deepest gash would open wider. He set the rifle down against the post, spoke nothing, only low, steady sounds. Then he reached for the cutters. The rain came sideways that night, not the gentle kind, not the kind that made you think of green fields or sleeping easy. This was Arizona rain, mean and cold and personal. The kind that found every gap in your roof and reminded you that the desert didn't actually owe you anything. Everett Calhoun sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. He hadn't moved to warm it up. There was a photograph on the table in front of him, small, the edges worn soft from handling. A woman with dark hair and serious eyes. A boy standing beside her, squinting into the sun, trying very hard not to smile and failing, completely. Martha. Thomas. Everett looked at them the way a man looks at something he can't fix. Not with despair exactly. Something quieter than despair. Something that had settled in so deep, it had stopped feeling like anything at all. Just weight. Just the particular gravity of a life that had kept going, after the people who made it worth living had stopped. He was 45 years old. He'd been a border tracker for the Union Army for 8 years. He'd read trails that other men couldn't see. He'd found men who didn't want to be found. He'd been good at it, better than good. And he had not been home in the summer of 1871 when the cholera came through. That was the fact he lived with, not the details, not the slow parts, just the simple arithmetic of it. He had been somewhere else, and they had needed him. And the distance between those two things was the distance he now lived in every single day, in this cabin on this land, 14 miles from the nearest town, with a cold cup of coffee and a photograph, and the sound of rain hitting the roof like it had something to prove. He'd bought this place in 1872, 6 months after he quit. 40 acres of hard ground in the Arizona Territory. Close enough to the Oregon mountains that on clear mornings the peaks turned purple before the sun came up. He'd built the fence himself, repaired the cabin himself, put in a small corral, bought 3 horses and 12 head of cattle and told himself that was enough to do with a life. Most days he almost believed it. The rain kept coming. Everett reached for the coffee, set it down without drinking. Looked at the photograph. Thomas had been 9 years old. He'd been the kind of kid who collected rocks. Interesting ones. He'd kept them in a tin box under his bed, and he would explain each one very seriously to anyone who sat still long enough to listen. Everett used to sit on the floor beside that bed for longer than he needed to. Not because he cared about rocks. Because that boy's voice, explaining things, was the best sound he'd ever heard in his life. He was thinking about that voice, when the noise came from behind the barn. He was on his feet before he was fully awake to the decision. 8 years of tracking did that to a man, made his body answer things before his mind caught up. He took the rifle from beside the door, not running, moving. There was a difference. Running made noise. Moving put you where you needed to be without announcing it. The rain was heavier outside, immediate. It hit his hat and his shoulders and ran down the back of his neck. The lantern he'd grabbed barely reached 3 feet in any direction. He came around the corner of the barn and stopped. She was caught in the wire along the back fence. 3 strands of it. Tangled at the neck and the left foreleg and across her hindquarters in a way that meant every time she'd tried to pull free, she'd made it worse. She was bleeding from at least 4 places he could see. Her sides were heaving. Her eyes were showing white all around. But that wasn't the thing that stopped him. The thing that stopped him was the paint. red and black, geometric, precise, applied with intention and knowledge and a specific understanding of what those patterns meant and to whom. This was not a rancher's horse, not a cavalry horse, not a drifter's animal picked up cheap at some auction down in El Paso. This was an Apache horse, a warrior's horse, and not just any warrior. Everett had spent 8 years in this territory. He'd learned to read the land and the people who lived on it, whether the army wanted him to or not. He'd studied the markers, the symbols, the ways different bands identified themselves and their animals and their dead. He knew these patterns. He stood in the rain for a long moment. The mare looked at him. He set the rifle against the fence post. "All right," he said. To himself. To her. To the rain. "All right. Easy now." It took him an hour just to get close enough to touch her. He didn't rush it. Rushing was the wrong instinct, with a frightened animal and with most frightened things. He moved slowly, spoke quietly, not words exactly, just sounds. The low, continuous kind that said, "I am not a threat. I am not fast. I am just here, and I am going to keep being here until you understand that." She trembled when he finally got a hand on her neck. The muscles under his palm were shaking like wire in a high wind. "I know," he said. "I know it." He worked, by lantern light, for the next 3 hours. First, the wire. He had to cut it in 4 places and work each strand free with one hand, while the other stayed on her neck. She pulled twice, hard. Reopened one of the cuts on her foreleg both times. He just kept going, then the wounds. He cleaned them with what he had. Whiskey for the deep ones. He stitched the worst gash on her flank, with a curved needle and gut thread meant for tack repair. She stood for it, trembling but standing. Like she'd made a decision somewhere in that first hour. Like she'd decided this man was not the thing to be afraid of tonight. By the time he finished, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. He led her into the barn, put her in the empty stall, brought water, brought grain. Stood and watched her drink. His hands were red with her blood and his own from where the wire had caught him. He looked at the paint on her hide, red and black in the lamplight. The patterns he recognized, knew who she belonged to, knew what that meant. He stood there a long time. Then he went inside and sat back down at the table. The coffee was still cold. He drank it anyway. He did not sleep. He sat with Martha and Thomas in the dark until the windows started going gray. And he thought about what it meant to have something that didn't belong to you, and what a man was supposed to do about that. He already knew the answer. He'd known it from the moment he saw the paint. He just needed the night to make his peace with what that answer was going to cost him. Cobre Flats was not a beautiful town. It had never tried to be. It was a functional town, practical. The kind of place that existed because people needed somewhere to buy flour and mail letters and get a tooth pulled without riding 3 days to do it. The buildings along the main street were sun-bleached and slightly crooked, as if the whole town had leaned away from the wind. For so long, it had forgotten how to stand straight. Everett rode in mid-morning, left his own horse at the rail outside Alcott's general store, went inside. Desmond Alcott was behind the counter, arguing with a sack of flour that had split at the seam. He was 58 years old, built like a man who'd done serious physical work for 30 years, and then stopped, and he had the particular expression of someone who had strong opinions about everything, and shared most of them whether you'd asked or not. He looked up when Everett came in. "You look terrible," Desmond said. "Worse than usual," which is saying something. "Morning," Everett said. "It's almost noon." "Morning." Desmond gave up on the flour sack, pushed it to one side, looked at Everett more carefully, at the dark circles, at the stiffness in how he was holding himself, at the cuts on his hands that he hadn't bothered to explain away. "What happened?" Everett told him. The mare in the wire, the wounds, the night in the barn. He told it flat and factual, the way a tracker reports terrain. No drama. Just information. Desmond listened without interrupting. That alone told Everett something. Desmond Alcott interrupted everything. It was practically a personality trait. The fact that he stayed quiet through the whole account meant he understood what he was hearing. Whenever it finished, Desmond was quiet for another moment. Then he said, "What markings?" "Red and black. River pattern on the left shoulder. 3 lines down the neck." Desmond's jaw tightened, just slightly. "You know whose that is. I know whose that is." "Then, you know you've got a problem." "I know what I'm going to do about it." Desmond stared at him. "Everett. There was an attack last week. You hear about it? Group of Mescalero out hunting, north of the Capitan Ridge. Someone hit them. Killed 2 young men. Took 4 horses." He paused. "People are still upset about it." People meaning the Apache, not the town. The town mostly just locked its doors and hoped the upset stayed over there. "I heard something about it. 2 men dead." Desmond said, "Young men. And you've got one of their horses in your barn, which is why I'm going to return her." Desmond looked at him for a long time. The kind of look that was doing calculation, weighing things. "You could just leave her somewhere. Let her find her own way back. She's got 4 wounds and she spent a night in wire. She's not going anywhere on her own. You could bring her to the edge of their territory and let her loose. She might not make it. Everett. She's not my horse." Desmond. Desmond put both hands flat on the counter. "You ride into Apache territory right now, with all the anger that's sitting up there after last week, carrying the chief's horse. They will assume you were involved. They will not wait for thick explanations. Then I'll have to be convincing. Or dead. Those aren't mutually exclusive." Desmond stared at him. Everett looked back, patient, unhurried, the way he looked at most things now. Like time was something he had too much of, and nothing worth spending it on had come along yet. "You're serious," Desmond said. "When am I not? You are a very frustrating man." Martha used to say the same thing. A beat. She was usually right. The name landed in the room between them, softly, the way it always did. Desmond had known Martha, had liked her enormously, which was saying something because Desmond was not a man who liked people enormously as a general rule. He'd come to her funeral. He'd come to the other one, too, the smaller one, the worse one, with the small box, and the town standing around in the heat not knowing what to do with their hands. He looked down at the counter. "What do you need?" he said. It wasn't a question. "I need to know if you've heard anything about who hit them." "Who did the raid?" Desmond was for a moment. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that was different from thinking. The kind that was deciding, "Tell me," Everett said. "You're going to go regardless. Tell me anyway." Desmond exhaled through his nose, looked toward the door. Back at Everett. 3 days before the attack. "I saw Briggs Yount in here. You know who that is?" Everett shook his head. "Drifter, comes through 2-3 times a year. Not a bad man necessarily. Not a good one. The kind that goes whichever direction the money's pointing." Desmond lowered his voice, even though they were the only 2 people in the store. "He was talking to someone I didn't know. Couldn't hear what they were saying. But I saw money change hands. Significant money. More than a man like Briggs earns doing anything legitimate. And then a raid happened. And then a raid happened." 3 days later, Desmond met his eyes. "I don't know if Briggs did the killing himself, but I think he knew it was coming. I think he might have helped set it up." Everett was still. "Processing. You didn't tell the sheriff I told Reed Cobb what I saw." "You know what Reed Cobb said?" Desmond's voice went dry as old wood. "Apache raids ain't my jurisdiction, and I ain't riding up to Mescalero country to ask questions for the benefit of people who'd as soon shoot me as look at me." Direct quote. "Right. The man is many things. Brave is not among them." Everett nodded slowly. "Who was the other man? The one paying Briggs. Didn't know him. But he was dressed well. Not a drifter. Someone with money of his own." Desmond paused. "Had the look of a man who was used to other people doing his difficult work." There it was. Not a simple raid. Not random violence. Someone had planned this. Someone had wanted 2 Apache men dead and 4 Apache horses taken. Someone had wanted the Mescalero angry. Had wanted them hitting back at anyone, anything the nearest available white man. Which meant whoever it was, They wanted conflict. They wanted a reason for the army to ride in. They wanted the kind of chaos that cleared land of people and opened it up for other purposes. Everett had seen that before, in different places. Under different names, it always looked the same. "I need to tell Tohono," he said. Desmond stared at him. "You're going to ride in there and tell the chief of the Mescalero that someone's been paying people to start a war with his band. Yes, while carrying his horse. That's the point of entry. That is the most." Desmond stopped. "Start it again, Everett. You could get the information to them some other way. There are people who go back and forth. Traders. There's a woman in Tularosa who, by the time a message gets there, if it gets there, they'll already have hit someone, and then someone hits back. And then more people are dead." Everett picked up his hat from the counter. "I've got the horse. That gets me through the door. Everything else I can say once I'm on the other side of it, or you'll be dead before you finish your first sentence. That's a risk." "Why?" Desmond said it flatly, not with emotion. Just the question. "Why is this your problem? You didn't start this. You didn't raid anybody. You don't owe these people anything." Everett looked at him for a moment. "Desmond," he said, "when Thomas was sick, who was the first one at the house?" Desmond went very still. "You rode 8 miles in the middle of the night because Martha sent word. You sat with Thomas for 2 hours while she slept because she hadn't slept in 3 days. You didn't know my son. Not really. But you came anyway." Silence. "Why was that your problem?" Desmond looked away, out the window, at the bleached street and the leaning buildings and the flat blue sky beyond. "That was different," he said. But he said it quietly. "It's exactly the same," Everett said. "Someone needs help. You go." He put his hat on, walked to the door. "Everett," he stopped. Desmond was looking at him with an expression that was trying to be irritated and not quite making it. "You come back in one piece. You hear me? I'm not attending another funeral for people from your family. I've met my quota." Something moved across Everett's face, not qua smile. "Close enough. I'll do my best," he said. He walked out into the noon sun. He went back to the ranch first, fed and watered the mare again. Checked the stitches. She was steadier than the night before, still wary, but the wild-eyed panic was gone. She let him put a light rope around her neck without fighting it. He packed what he needed: canteen, jerky, the rifle in its scabbard, his revolver on his hip, medical supplies in the saddlebag, because he was already thinking about the state of her wounds and the journey ahead. He didn't pack as if he expected to be gone long. He didn't want to think too carefully about what that meant. He left in early afternoon. His own horse, a steady gray called Hannibal, set a good pace. The mare walked beside on the lead rope, calmer with every mile, as if something in the landscape was settling her down. Like she knew the direction. Maybe she did. The terrain changed as he moved northwest. Flatter ground gave way to broken country. Red rock formations rising up from the scrub. Pinon and juniper getting more frequent. The light-changing quality as the afternoon moved, going from the flat white of midday to something warmer and more angled. Everett watched the ridges. He'd spent 8 years learning to watch ridges. It was a habit he'd never been able to put down, even in the years since when there'd been nothing worth watching for. Now there was. He rode for 3 hours. The first marker was a stack of stones on a high rock to his left. Deliberate arrangement, not decorative, functional. This is our land. This is a warning. This is your last chance to think about what you're doing. Everett noted it. Kept riding, he topped a low rise, and the canyon country opened up ahead of him. Deep red walls, narrow passages. The kind of geography that made you very aware of how exposed you were and how quickly that could become a problem. He stopped Hannibal, took off his hat, wiped his face with his sleeve, put the hat back. The mare was looking ahead, ears forward, nostrils working. She knew something he couldn't smell yet. He had been watched for the last hour. He was sure of it. He hadn't tried to hide, hadn't taken cover or varied his route or done any of the things a man does when he's trying to avoid being seen. He'd ridden straight and slow and visible hands in plain sight, rifle untouched in its scabbard. If anyone was watching, he wanted them to see exactly what he was, a man with nothing to hide, going somewhere specific. On purpose, he urged Hannibal forward into the canyon. They came from the rocks, not running, not screaming, nothing dramatic. One moment the canyon walls were empty. The next moment there were 3 of them, appearing so smoothly from the stone that Everett's brain took a second to accept. They were real and not some trick of the light. They spread across the trail in front of him. Everett stopped. The 3 men sat their horses with the absolute stillness of people who had spent their entire lives outdoors and knew exactly how to use landscape and silence as tools. 2 of them had rifles laid across their saddles, not raised but immediately available. The third had a bow with an arrow already seated. They were looking at him, at the mare, at him again. Everett raised his right hand slowly, palm out. The universal language of "I am not going to do anything sudden." With his other hand, he gestured to the painted mare walking beside him. "I found your horse," he called out. His voice was steady. Good. He needed it to be steady. "She was caught in wire behind my land. She was hurt. I fixed her up. I'm bringing her back." The 3 men didn't respond. They just watched. He'd expected that. "I mean no harm," he said. "That is the whole of what I'm here to do." "Return what's yours." Still nothing. One of them, the one in the center, said something to the other 2 in a low voice. Everett didn't catch it, but the other 2 responded to it, spreading slightly wider, flanking. Not a threatening gesture exactly. More like adjustment. Like they were solving a problem together without rushing it. The one in the center rode forward. He was older than the other 2, 50, maybe more. Something in the face that had seen enough of everything to stop surprised by any of it. His eyes went to the painted mare first, stayed there, moving over her slowly, the way a man checks something he values when he's checking whether it's been damaged. He saw the stitches. He looked at Everett. "You do this." Not a question. He was pointing at the sutured wounds on her flank. "Yes. She was in wire. Bad cuts. I cleaned them and sewed them up. She'll heal." Everett paused. "All 4 of them, including the one on her neck that was the deepest. That one needed 4 stitches." The man's eyes were doing something complicated, processing. Not just the information, the fact of it. Why a man would do this. What it meant that he had. "Why," he said. "Because she needed help," Everett said. "And because she's not my horse." The man studied him for a long moment. Then he turned and spoke to the other 2. The exchange was brief. The other 2 responded. The bows and rifles didn't disappear exactly, but they became less immediate. Less like decisions in progress. The older man looked back at Everett. "You come," he said. It was not a request. He turned his horse and started moving deeper into the canyon. The other 2 positioned themselves behind Everett without being told to. Bracketing. Efficient. They knew what they were doing. Everett let Hannibal follow. He thought, "I am either going to get through this, or I'm not." He thought, Martha would probably think this was equal parts honorable and idiotic. He thought, she would be right on both counts. And then he stopped thinking about it, and focused on the canyon walls, moving past him on both sides, red and ancient and indifferent. And the sound of hooves on dry stone, and the mare walking beside him, like she was finally going home. The canyon opened after 40 minutes of narrow passage and shadow and red rock, closing in on both sides. The walls simply pulled back, and there was sky again, and a wide valley floor, and the camp spread across it. In the late afternoon light, wickiups, brush and hide shelters, arranged with the practical logic of people who knew exactly how to make use of the land they were standing on. Cooking fires sending thin threads of smoke up into the still air. The smell of meat. The sound of water somewhere nearby. Children's voices. Everett had been in Apache camps before, in his tracking years, rarely, and always under very different circumstances. He'd never come voluntarily. He'd never come with a horse on a lead rope and a choice he'd already made. Everything stopped when they rode in. The women looked up from what they were doing. The children stopped moving. Warriors appeared from between shelters, hands finding weapons with the automatic ease of people, for whom readiness was just another word for breathing. Every eye in the camp was on Everett. Ha! He kept his hands visible, kept his face neutral, kept Hannibal at a steady walk. He was the only white man here. He was aware of that the way you're aware of a wound, constantly, in the background, without being able to put it down. They stopped in the center of the camp. The older warrior dismounted, gestured for Everett to do the same. He climbed down, his legs were stiff. He was aware of being watched doing it, aware of being watched doing everything. There was a pause, a beat of held breath in the camp. Then someone emerged from the largest shelter. Everett had been around enough kinds of authority in his life to recognize it when it came out of a door. Military officers, senior lawmen, judges. None of that was the same as this, exactly. But the fundamental quality was the same. The way space organized itself differently around certain people. The way other people adjusted without being told to. This man was tall, broad through the shoulders. His face was the face of someone who had been paying extremely close attention to the world for a long time. There were scars, old ones, the kind that had been there long enough to become part of the geography of a person. He wore no war paint. He didn't need it. He walked to the painted mare first, not to Everett, to the mare. He ran both hands along her neck, slow and familiar, the way you touch something that belongs to you and has been somewhere difficult. The mare lowered her head into his chest, just slightly. Something that was neither horse nor man, but was something between them, something old and specific. His jaw tightened when he found the stitches. He examined each one carefully. Then he straightened and looked at Everett. "My brother's horse," he said. His English was deliberate, constructed. Like a building assembled with care, rather than a thing that had grown naturally. Taken 3 days ago. 2 of our young men killed. A pause. We track horses to the white men's town. Already gone. Already sold. Another pause. We think we do not see her again. "I'm sorry about your men," Everett said. He meant it. He said it the way he meant it, which was quietly and without decoration. "I had nothing to do with what happened to them. I found her hurt and I brought her home. That's all this is." The man looked at him. "You know what happens," he said. "If my people find white man with our horse, yes, we think he is thief. We kill him. I know, you know this, not a question. And you come anyway. Yes, why?" Everett had been thinking about this question since the night before. Since he'd stood in the barn with his hands red with her blood, and looked at the paint on her hide and understood what he was holding. He'd had all night and most of a day to find the answer, because I've spent enough of my life seeing what happens when people take what isn't theirs, he said. I've seen what it costs. I don't want to be part of that, not even the small version of it. He paused. She was hurt. She needed help, and she belongs to you, not to me. That was the beginning and the end of it. The chief, and Everett understood by now, that this was who he was looking at, studied him for a long moment. Around them, the camp was very quiet. Then the chief turned and spoke to the people gathered. His voice was different when he spoke in his own language. Faster, more resonant. Some of the warriors responded, not all positively. One young man said something that had the shape of an argument. The chief raised one hand and the young man stopped immediately. He looked back at Everett. You stay, he said. We watch. We decide if you speak truth. He turned and walked back toward the large shelter. 2 warriors appeared beside Everett, close enough that their intentions were clear even without words. Not prisoners exactly, not free either. He was escorted to a small shelter at the camp's edge. No rope, no chains. Just 2 men outside the entrance who were very clearly not going anywhere. Everett ducked inside and sat down on the ground. He could hear the camp continuing around him. The cooking fires. The children, who had returned to playing with the adaptability that children have, which is both wonderful and slightly unsettling. Women's voices. Someone hammering something rhythmically. Normal life. The same kind of noise as any settlement, any farm, any town. different language, different shape, same basic human sound. People making it through another day, feeding their families, working, talking, living. It was easy to forget that when all you ever heard were the words raid and attack and threat. When the only stories told about a people were the stories of violence, he sat with that thought for a while. He sat with Thomas and his rocks, with Martha's voice telling him once, in the kitchen in the early morning before the boy was up, that the most dangerous thing in the world was deciding. You already knew someone before you'd ever listened to them. She'd been talking about her sister, but it had the kind of truth that travels. The sun moved toward the western walls of the canyon. The light went from white to gold to the particular deep orange that Arizona afternoons do when they're ending. Through the gaps in the shelter's walls, Everett could see it changing on the red rock faces opposite. He thought about what Desmond had told him. Briggs Yount, the money-changing hands. The man in good clothes with the look of someone accustomed to paying for his difficult work. He thought about why someone would want this war to start. Land, almost certainly. It was almost always land. There was something under it, or on it, or around it that someone wanted, and the most efficient way to get it was to make the people currently standing on it seem like a problem that needed solving. He'd seen it before. Different territory, different decade, same transaction. Someone out there was sitting some comfortable right now. Someone who had never been in a canyon. Never sat in an enemy's camp not knowing which way it was going to go. Never watched two young men die for reasons that had nothing to do with them. Someone who needed conflict the way a business needs inventory. Everett sat with that thought, sat with it getting darker. The chief came at sunset. He ducked into the shelter and sat down across from Everett, with the unhurried manner of a man who had made his decision, and was not anxious about delivering. He said, "There is something to say." To everyone. Outside, the camp had gathered around the central fire. The whole of it. Warriors and elders and women and children, the light of the fire making everyone's face move with it. Everett stood where he was directed, which was in the center, visible to all of them. The chief raised his hand. Silence fell like it had been waiting for the signal. "This man," the chief said, loud enough that it carried, "brought back my brother's horse. He found her hurt. He fixed her wounds." A pause. "He rode into our land alone to return what was stolen. He did not have to do this. He knew the risk." The fire crackled. "Some say we should not trust him." The chief looked around at his people. "He is white man. He comes from people who take our land, who break every promise made, who hunt us from our own places." Another pause. "These things are true," murmuring around the fire. Not all of it hostile. Some of it was simply agreement with the truth that cost nothing to say. But he did not take, the chief continued. He gave back. He did not lie. He spoke plainly. He turned and looked directly at Everett. "Our people have a way. When someone shows respect, we answer with respect. When someone acts with honor, we recognize it." He reached to his belt. He drew out a cord, leather, braided, strung with small beads, and a carved piece of pale stone at its center. He held it up so the firelight caught it. "This is mark of safe passage," he said. "Any of our people who see it know the person who carries it is under our protection. No harm will come to them in our territory." He stepped forward and placed it around Everett's neck. The weight of it settled against his chest. Small, lighter than he'd expected. The chief leaned slightly closer, voice lower. "Just for Everett now, understand something," he said. "If other white men see you wear this, they will call you traitor. They will not understand what it means." Everett looked at him steadily. "My name is Everett Calhoun," he said. "What's yours?" Something moved in the man's face. An adjustment, small and significant. "Tohono," he said. Everett nodded. "Tohono." He let the word sit right. Said it the way it deserved to be said, not approximated. "I've spent the last 2 years trying to stop caring what other people think about my choices. I'm mostly succeeding." Tohono studied him. "You are strange man, Everett Calhoun," he said at last. "But perhaps useful kind of strange." He stepped back. raised his voice again. "This man is not our enemy. Let it be known." Some of the warriors nodded. Some still looked skeptical. The young man who had argued earlier was looking at Everett, with an expression that hadn't decided itself yet. Tohono looked at Everett one more time. "Your weapons are with your horse," he said. "You are free to go." Everett nodded his thanks. He touched the cord at his neck briefly. "Tohono," he said, "there's something you need to know. About who took those horses. About why they were taken." Tohono's eyes sharpened, not surprised exactly, but newly attentive. "Not tonight," Tohono said. "Tonight you go home, sleep, come back tomorrow if you choose. We talk then." He paused. "Or send word through Alcott's store." "I know Alcott." Everett blinked. Tohono's expression held something that was probably the closest thing to amusement available in that face. "You think I don't know who sells flour to everyone in 60 miles? I think," Everett said slowly, "that I've been underestimating the amount that's been going on around me." "Most white men do," Tohono said simply. "Not cruel, just accurate." He turned and walked back toward his shelter. Everett stood at the edge of the firelight, with the cord around his neck and the sound of the camp coming back to life around him. He found Hannibal where the warriors had tied him. His rifle and revolver were laid carefully against the saddle, exactly as he'd left them. He mounted up, looked back once at the camp, at the fires, at the painted mare standing in the corral with the other horses, her head low, her breathing easy. Home. He rode out of the canyon. The ride back took longer in the dark. He didn't push Hannibal, let the horse find the way by instinct and memory. The moon came up behind him, filling the desert with silver, making the scrub cast small, perfect shadows. He thought about Tohono, about the weight of a man who had been lied to so many times. He'd had to build his entire way of reading the world around the assumption of dishonesty. And what it cost to maintain that, what kind of discipline it took to still be capable of the gesture. Tohono had made tonight, after everything, after all of it. He thought about what Desmond had told him, Briggs Yount, the man in good clothes, the money. He was going to have to deal with that. Not tomorrow. Tonight he needed sleep. His shoulder ached from 2 nights of no rest, and the physical work of the mare's wounds and the hours in the saddle. His body was making very clear statements about its preferences. The ranch came into view around midnight. Low against the dark, the cabin's small window catching some of the moonlight. The corral was a pale line against the black ground. He unsaddled Hannibal, fed him. Stood in the barn doorway for a moment, looking out at the quiet. Somewhere to the northwest, in the canyon country, fires were burning low in a camp where people were settling into sleep. People who had reasons, good reasons, earned reasons, reasons that would take a library of history to fully account for, to hate him on sight, who had instead handed him a cord of safe passage and told him to come back tomorrow. He touched the cord at his neck, went inside, pulled off his boots, lay down on the cot. He was asleep before he'd finished the thought he'd been trying to have about Martha and what she would say about all of this. He thought she probably would have said. It's about time. He slept hard, no dreams, or none he remembered when the sound of horses woke him at first light. Multiple horses. He was at the door with the rifle before he was fully awake. The old instincts, the old reflexes that never quite left. He looked out through the gap between door and frame. 6 Apache warriors in his yard, not in attack formation. Stationary. Waiting. And one of them was leading a horse with a body draped across the saddle. Everett stood very still for a moment. Then he opened the door and stepped outside. Rifle lowered, hands visible. The cord from Tohono visible at his neck, the warrior at the front. One of the men from the canyon yesterday raised his hand in greeting, then gestured to the horse with its burden. Everett approached slowly. The man across the saddle was alive, unconscious, badly beaten, hands bound behind his back. A white man, dusty clothes. The particular look of someone who had been found hiding and had not enjoyed the experience. Everett looked at the warrior. "Who is this?" The warrior's English was limited but sufficient. "Thief," he said. He take horses, help kill our men. We find him 2 days ago. Hiding in rocks, he paused. Tohono say bring to you. You decide. Everett looked at the man across the saddle, back at the warrior, decide what? The warrior made a slow gesture. A choice that needed no translation, life or death. Everett stood in the early light of an Arizona morning, with the beaded cord at his neck and a half-conscious man in front of him, and 6 warriors watching to see what kind of man he actually was. Not what kind he claimed to be, what kind he was. He looked at the unconscious man for a long time. The bruised face, the broken nose, the bound hands. Someone who had made a terrible choice and found his way to the end of it. Everett Calhoun had seen enough endings. He was tired, bone-tired. Not the tiredness of the last 2 nights without sleep. The older kind. The kind that came from years of violence making more violence, and everyone calling it justice, while the blood kept accumulating. He looked up at the warrior. Take him to the sheriff in Cowboy Flats, he said. Let the law handle it, the warrior frowned. Considering white man's law, he's a white man. He committed crimes against your people and mine. Stealing is stealing regardless of who you steal from. Let him answer for it in front of a judge. Everett paused. There are other people involved. People above him. People with money and influence who planned this whole thing. He's going to need to talk, and he needs to be alive to do that. The warrior translated for the others. There was a brief exchange. Then the warrior looked back at Everett. You do not want blood. I've had enough of blood, Everett said. I want the right people to answer for the right things. That's different. Something shifted in the warrior's expression. Not quite agreement. Something more considered than that. Tohono will hear your choice, the warrior said. He will know you speak truth. He paused. You understand difference between revenge and justice. I'm still learning it, Everett said. But yes, I think I understand the difference. The warrior nodded, remounted. The group turned south toward Cowboy Flats, toward the town that didn't know yet what was riding toward it. Before they disappeared from view, the lead warrior looked back once. You are strange white man, Everett Calhoun, he said. Everett thought, that's the second time someone's told it in 24 hours. He said, I've been told. The warrior held his gaze for a moment. Then the ghost of something that wasn't quite a smile crossed. Strange, he said, but good. Then they were gone. The dust settled slowly in the morning air. Everett stood in his yard with the cord at his neck and the photograph of Martha and Thomas, somewhere inside on the table. And the long day ahead that was going to involve Desmond and Briggs Yount, and the question of who had been paying for other people's violence. But right now it was just the morning, just the quiet. Just a man standing on his own land, watching dust settle, understanding that something had shifted in the world around him, small, irreversible, like most of the things that actually mattered. He went inside to make coffee. This time he was going to drink it while it was still hot. The coffee was good that morning, hot, strong. The kind that actually tasted like something instead of just warm and dark and going through the motions. Everett sat at the table with the photograph between his hands and drank the whole cup while it was still hot and thought that was probably the most successful thing he'd done in 2 years. Small victories. Martha used to say that. Count the small ones, Everett. The big ones are too rare to live on. He looked at her face in the photograph. She had been right about most things. Cowboy Flats had a sheriff's office that looked exactly like you'd expect a sheriff's office to look in a town that wasn't particularly proud of itself. 2 rooms, a desk that listed to the left, 3 cells in the back, 2 of which were usually empty because most of the serious trouble in this part of the territory didn't bother with the formality of jail. Reed Cobb was the sheriff, 52 years old, broad, slow-moving in the deliberate way of a man who'd decided long ago that urgency was for other people. He had a deputy named Garrett, who was 23 and enthusiastic in the way of someone who hadn't yet figured out how badly things could go. Everett walked in. Cobb looked up from his desk. then looked at the beaded cord at Everett's neck. Long pause. "Morning," Everett said. "Is it?" Cobb said. "Not a question. More like a philosophical position. I hear you have a guest." "I have what 6 Apache warriors left on my front step. At dawn," Cobb said, which is not a sentence I expected to say today, or ever. He leaned back in his chair, which complained about it. "They just rode in, cool as you please. Tied that man to my hitching post. Told Garrett," he nodded toward the deputy in the corner, "that he was a horse thief and a murderer, and that Everett Calhoun had sent them." He paused. "Would you like to explain that?" "He steal horses from the Mescalero," Everett said. "Helped set up the raid that killed 2 men. His name is Briggs Yount." Cobb's expression did several things in quick succession. None of them were relaxed. "Apache don't usually bring people to me," Cobb said. "Apache usually handle their own. They made an exception. Why? Because I asked them to." Another long pause. Cobb looked at the cord. Looked at Everett. Looked at the cord again. "You been out there," Cobb said. "Yesterday. To their camp. To their camp. Alive. Evidently." Cobb rubbed his face with both hands. "Everett. I don't know whether to shake your hand or check you for a head injury." "I need to talk to Yount," Everett said, "before anyone else does." That landed. Cobb heard the weight in it. "You think someone's going to try to get to him," Cobb said slowly. "I think whoever paid him to set up that raid doesn't want him talking to a judge." "Yes." Cobb was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up, picked up his key ring. "5 minutes," he said. "And I'm standing right there." Briggs Yount looked like a man who'd had a very educational week. The swelling around his left eye had gone down enough that he could see out of it. Barely. His nose was broken. There was a cut across his chin that had been closed with no particular care. He was sitting on the cell cot with his arms on his knees and the particular stillness of someone who had run out of options and was waiting to see what shape the next thing took. He looked up when Everett came in. Something moved through his eyes. Not recognition exactly. More like the assessment a man makes when he's trying to figure out what category of trouble has just walked through the door. "You Calhoun," he said. "That's right. Apache said your name." "Yes." Yount looked at the cord. Back at Everett's face. "You know them people." "Getting to," Everett said. He sat down on the stool the deputy had dragged over, which put him at eye level with Yount, rather than standing over him. "Deliberate. Tell me about the man who paid you." Yount's eyes went careful. "Don't know what you're talking about." "Desmond Alcott saw money change hands 3 days before the raid. You and a man in good clothes, his store. He has a very good memory for transactions." Yount was quiet. "Here's what I know," Everett said. He kept his voice level, conversational, like they were discussing the weather or the price of feed. "You helped plan an attack that killed 2 young men. That's a hanging offense in federal territory. But you didn't plan it. Someone paid you to participate. That someone is the person I'm interested in. You tell me who that is. You give the judge something to work with. You stay quiet. You hang for the whole thing, while the man who gave you the money sits somewhere comfortable and lets you do it." Yount was very still. Not the stillness of someone who had nothing to say, the stillness of someone doing arithmetic. "He's got people," Yount said. Finally, quietly. "Everywhere. He finds out I talked. He already knows you've been caught," Everett said. "The only question now is whether you're useful or whether you're just a loose end." That landed. Yount's jaw tightened. "Pemberton Hale," he said, very quietly, like saying it too loud would bring something down on him. Everett kept his face still. Pemberton Hale, he knew the name. Everyone in the territory knew the name. Land speculator, property man. Had holdings from Tucson north to Santa Fe. Had the kind of money that made legal problems go away and the kind of connections that made other problems go away by other means. He wanted the Apache gone, Yount said. Not killed. Just pushed out. Scared enough to move further into the mountains. He's got a surveyor's report on those canyons. Silver, he thinks. Maybe copper. But Apache all over that land, and as long as they're there, he can't get the army too. He stopped. To come in and clear them out, Everett said. If there's raids, if settlers are getting hit, if it looks like a security problem. Then the army comes. And when the army comes, Hale gets his land. Yount said nothing, which was the same as yes. Everett sat with that for a moment, 2 young men dead. An entire band of people pushed toward more violence and more retaliation and more reason for the government to point at them and say, "See, they can't be reasoned with." All of it arranged by a man in good clothes who'd paid someone like Briggs Yount to do the actual work. The old familiar shape of how the world operated. "I need you to say that to a judge," Everett said. Yount looked at him. "You said you'd put in a word." "I said it gives you something to work with. I'll tell the truth about what I know, what Desmond Alcott knows. That's what I can offer." Yount looked at the cell wall, at his hands. At the floor, "Hale's got friends in the territorial government," he said. "Judges too, maybe, Everett said. "And maybe not all of them. And maybe what Tohono's people have to say in that courtroom carries more weight than Hale expects." Yount looked up sharply. "Apache can't testify in." "Times change," Everett said. He stood up. "Think about it." "You've got time." He walked out. The ride northwest felt different the second time. Not easier. Different. The first time he'd been making a decision, working out whether the thing he was about to do was the right thing, and whether the right thing was worth what it might cost. That work was done. He'd paid the price of entry and come out the other side of it. Now he was just riding. The sun was still climbing. The canyon country came up ahead of him the way it had yesterday, red and immense and entirely, unconcerned with what humans thought about it. He spotted the first marker stone, kept going. This time the warriors appeared sooner. 2 of them, from a different position than yesterday. They recognized him, or recognized the cord. One of them nodded once, a small thing, efficient, and turned to lead him in. The camp in daylight was different from the camp at dusk, more activity, more noise. The structured business of people who lived close to the land and understood exactly what that required. Women working at the cooking fires and at hides stretched on frames. Children moving in the particular fluid way of children who have space to run and use it. Warriors coming and going, with the purposeful ease of people who knew their roles and didn't need to think about them. Everett was still watched, but differently than yesterday. There was still wariness, but there was also something else. Curiosity, maybe. The look a community gives to something it hasn't categorized yet and is trying to understand. He was brought to Tohono. The chief was standing outside his shelter, watching 2 men repair something on a saddle frame. He turned when Everett arrived, looked at him with those unhurried, appraising eyes. "You came back," Tohono said. "I said I would. Many men say things. I noticed," Everett said. "That's actually what I'm here to talk about." They sat. Not inside. Outside, on the shaded side of the shelter, where there was a slight movement of air from the canyon, and the sound of the camp going on around them. Someone brought 2 tin cups of something that turned out to be a tea made from plants. Everett didn't recognize. Dark and faintly bitter and surprisingly good. Tohono waited. That was a skill Everett had noticed in him. The capacity to simply wait, not impatiently, not as a tactic. Just the genuine willingness to let things arrive at their own speed rather than pulling at them. Everett told him everything. Briggs Yount, the money. The surveyor's report. Peton Hale and the plan to use Apache anger as a tool to justify military intervention. He laid it out the way he'd learned to lay out a trail, start to finish, no gaps, no assumptions, just what was there and what it meant. Tohono listened the way he'd waited, without interruption, without his expression giving much away. When Everett finished, the silence went on for a moment. "This man Hale," Tohono said. "He wants our land, the silver under it. Or copper, maybe both, and he is willing to have our young men killed to get it. He paid someone to set it in motion." Whether he thought about the killing directly or just thought about the result, I couldn't say. Men like that are good at not thinking too carefully about the cost of what they want. Tohono looked at his cup. "This is not new," he said quietly. This pattern, different name, different year. Same pattern. No, Everett said. It's not new. My father told me stories from when he was young. Same stories. Different men, yes. Tohono looked at him directly. You are telling me this because you want something. I'm telling you this because you needed to know it, Everett said. And because the people who died were your people. You have a right to know why, he paused. What I want is separate. Say it anyway. I want to take Yount to trial. I want Hale charged. I want the people who actually planned this to answer for it publicly, in a way that makes it harder for the next man to think he can do the same thing. He looked at Tohono steadily. For that to work, for a jury to convict a man like Hale, I need witnesses with credibility. I need people who were there, who saw what happened to your men. Tohono was very still. You want Apache to speak in white man's court, he said. I know what I'm asking, do you? Not quite a question. More like a test of whether he actually did. I know that every time your people have tried to work within the structures the government built, those structures have been used against you. I know that standing up in that courtroom means trusting a system that has given you no reason to trust it. Everett paused. I know it's a risk. A real one. I'm not pretending it isn't. Tohono was quiet for a long time. The sound of the camp moved around them. Somewhere nearby, one of the children was laughing at something. That particular sharp, helpless laugh of a child who has found something genuinely hilarious. My brother's horse, Tohono said finally. She is alive because you spent a night fixing her wounds. Yes, you did not have to do that. No, you did not know, when you fixed her wounds, that you would be sitting here having this conversation. No, you just fixed her because she needed fixing. Everett looked at him. That's right. Another silence. Then Tohono made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh but was in the same family. You are very inconvenient, man. Everett Calhoun, my wife had a longer list, Everett said. Inconvenient was somewhere in the middle. Tohono looked at the cord around Everett's neck, at his face, at some calculation happening behind his eyes that Everett couldn't read but could feel taking place. She is gone. Not a question. Going on 3 years now. Cholera. My son, too. Tohono said nothing for a moment. Then, my brother, the one whose horse you brought back. He died 2 years ago. Before this raid. Fever, he paused. The horse was all I had left of him. The last thing he touched. The last thing he loved. Everett sat with that. With the weight of it, 2 men. Sitting on opposite sides of a wall that the whole world had been building for 100 years. Both of them missing someone. Both of them carrying it. I'm sorry, Everett said. Because there was nothing else to say, and because he meant it. Tohono nodded, just once, accepting it. They were still talking when the trouble arrived, not loud. Not dramatic, just Chayton. Coming around the corner of the shelter with his jaw set, and his eyes doing the thing they did. That bright, barely contained quality of someone carrying more feeling than they knew what to do with. He stopped when he saw Everett, his hand moved toward his belt. Old reflex. Stopped, Tohono spoke to him in Apache. Sharp, calm. The kind of instruction that expected compliance and wasn't waiting to see if it would get it. Chayton responded. Short, hard words, Tohono replied. Shorter. Chayton looked at Everett. His face was doing several things at once, and doing all of them intensely. Everett looked back at him steadily. Not challenging, not apologetic. Just present. He knew this look. He'd seen it in other young men. In men his own age. He'd seen it in the mirror once, a long time ago, when he was young enough to think that anger was the same thing as justice, and that feeling something strongly enough was the same thing as being right. You were there, Chayton said, in English, when they took the horses. No, Everett said. You are white man. I am. My father was white man's age. The words came out jagged, like they were breaking apart as he said them. He had 20 more years. He should have had 20 more years. Everett didn't look away. I know. You don't know. Quick. Hard. You cannot know. And here was the place where most men would argue, would defend, would explain why they weren't responsible, why the accusation wasn't fair. Why the young man's grief was being directed at the wrong person. Everett didn't do that. You're right, he said. I don't know. I lost my son, my wife. But that's not the same as what you lost. Grief doesn't transfer. Doesn't make me understand yours. He paused. All I know is what it looks like from the outside. And from the outside, it looks like someone carrying something too heavy for one person. Chayton stared at him. His jaw was working. The thing happening in his face was not simple, and was not going to become simple anytime soon, but the hand had moved away from the belt. Tohono watched all of this out speaking. Finally, Chayton said something in Apache, quietly. Whatever it was, it had a different texture than what he'd been saying before. Less like accusation, more like admission. Tohono responded softly. Chayton looked at Everett one more time. Then he walked away. Back toward the camp, not running. Just walking, with his head down, like a man trying to outpace something that was keeping perfect pace with him. Everett exhaled. What did he say? He asked. He said his father used to tell him that the angriest men are always the ones who are most afraid. Tohono watched his foster sons retreating back. He said, he understands that now. Everett was quiet for a moment. Chayton, yes, he was in the attack. When the horses were taken, Tohono looked at him sideways. He survived. 2 others did not. He watched his father die. Yes, and then last night he came to my shelter with a knife. Tohono said nothing. You knew, Everett said. I suspected. Tohono met his eyes. I needed to see what you would do. Everett stared at him. That was another test. Everything is a test, Tohono said, simply. Every conversation, every silence, every choice. You have been in our world for less than 2 days. I have no other way to know who you are. Everett thought about that. About being watched and evaluated and weighed without knowing it. About how that felt. And then he thought about how that was Tohono's entire experience of dealing with anyone from the outside world. Every interaction potentially the one that cost everything. Every stranger potentially the one with worse intentions than the last. That's exhausting, Everett said. Something crossed Tohono's face. Yes, he said. It is. Everett stayed through the afternoon. He hadn't planned to. He'd come to talk about Yount and Hale and the trial. He'd said what he came to say. He could have ridden back to Cowboy Flats. Reported to Desmond, figured out the next step. But he stayed, not strategically, not as a tactic. He stayed because Tohono hadn't asked him to leave. And because there was a horse in the corral, with a broken rear hoof that needed looking at, and because Everett Calhoun had spent 8 years reading what animals needed, and the habit didn't stop, just because the situation was complicated. He went to the corral. He didn't ask. He just went. Looked at the horse, crouched down, examined the hoof with both hands. He became aware of being watched, not just one person, several. Women pausing in their work, children coming closer in the sidelong way. Children approach things that interest them, pretending not to, but definitely closing the distance. He kept working. The hoof had a crack running up from the toe, not catastrophic yet. But heading there, it needed cleaning out and packing, and probably a wrap to keep it stable while it grew out. He went to his saddlebags, got what he needed. He worked for an hour. No one talked to him during that hour, but no one told him to stop either. And the circle of people watching got smaller and closer as the hour went on without incident. At one point, a small girl, maybe 5 years old, round-faced, completely unafraid, walked up and stood directly beside him and watched what his hands were doing with intense professional interest. He kept working. She said something to him. He didn't understand it. I don't know, he said. But it should help. She seemed satisfied with that. She walked away. By the time he finished with the hoof, the afternoon light had gone long and golden, and Tohono was standing at the corral fence watching him. You know horses, Tohono said. I know a few things. Everett stood up. His knees made their opinions known. That hoof needs 3 more days before any hard riding. After that, it should be fine. Tohono studied the horse, studied Everett. You will come back in 3 days to check it? It was phrased as a question. It felt like something more significant than a question. "If you want me to," Everett said. Tohono looked at him steadily. "I am deciding whether to come to the white man's court," he said. It came out direct, like someone who had done their internal deliberating and arrived at the edge of a decision, and was saying it out loud to hear how it sounded. "Everett waited, what you said, about the pattern, different name, different year." Tohono looked out at the canyon walls beyond the camp. "Peton Hale is not the first. He will not be the last. And every time my people fight back, it gives men like him what they want. It justifies everything they were planning to do anyway." "Yes," Everett said. "That's right, but if we go to their court, if we speak their language, if we use their rules—" He stopped. "That has never worked before." "No," Everett admitted. "Not usually." "What is different this time?" Everett thought about it, really thought about it. Not the answer that would convince. The honest answer. "I don't know if anything is different," he said. "Maybe nothing is. Maybe we do everything right, and Hale walks away anyway. Maybe the judge is in his pocket. Maybe the jury doesn't believe Apache testimony. All of that could happen." He met Tohono's eyes. "But here's what I know. The alternative is more raids, more retaliation, more young men dead on both sides while Hale sits back and watches. The chaos clear his path." He paused. "I'd rather try the thing that might work than keep doing the thing that definitely doesn't." Tohono was quiet for a long time. The sun was getting low, the canyon walls going red and purple and deep orange in the last light. "My brother used to say," Tohono said slowly, "that there is no use building bridges if you are the only one willing to stand on them." He sounds like a smart man, he was. A pause. "He also said that sometimes someone has to be the first to stand on the bridge, to show the others. It holds weight." Everett said nothing. Just stood there, because some things you said by not filling the silence. Tohono looked at the cord around Everett's neck, at his own hands, at something beyond both of them. That was probably the long history of everything that had brought this moment into being. "I will speak to the elders tonight," he said. "We will decide as a people. Not just me." "That's fair," Everett said. "Come back tomorrow morning. Early. We will have an answer." Everett nodded. He picked up his bag, started toward Hannibal. "Everett Calhoun," Tohono said. He stopped. If we do this, it will not be only for your trial. Do you understand that?" Everett turned. "What do you mean?" "It will be because we choose to. Because we decide it serves our people and our dignity." He paused. "Not because you asked. Not because we owe you something for the horse. We do not operate on debt, I understand that." "Good." Tohono looked at him steadily. "Because if you misunderstand that, if you think you can claim our presence in that courtroom as something you arranged, then you are making the same mistake every white man makes, thinking everything is something he caused, something he controls." It landed with precision. "I don't think that," Everett said. "But thank you for saying it directly. Something that might have been approval. If you knew what to look for." Moved very briefly across Tohono's face. "Go," he said. "Come back early." Everett rode back in the last of the light. The desert was dark by the time he cleared the canyon mouth. Hannibal knew the way home. Everett let him find it. He was thinking about Chayton's face when he'd said the words about his father. That particular kind of anger. That is just grief wearing different clothes. He knew that face. He'd worn it himself. He was thinking about Desmond, about Briggs Yount in that cell, doing his arithmetic, about Peton Hale, sitting somewhere comfortable, not yet knowing how badly his plan had started to come apart. He was thinking about Thomas, about what the boy had said, about the 20 years that should have been there and weren't. Thomas should have had decades. He should have been learning to shave right now, probably. He should have been somewhere getting his heart broken for the first time and thinking it was the end of the world, the way every 18-year-old did. He should have been letters to his father about rock. He should have been so many things. And he wasn't. And the man who planned to use Apache grief as a land acquisition strategy Was going to sit in a nice house tonight and not think about any of the individual people his plan had broken. Everett thought. That's what this is about, not vengeance, not justice in the abstract. The specific reality of specific people. Chayton's father, Tohono's brother's horse, Thomas's tin box of rocks under the bed. The things that the big plans never accounted for. The things that were supposed to be acceptable losses. He wasn't willing to accept them. That was all. Desmond was still in the store when Everett rode in, past closing time. But the lamp was still on and Desmond was at the counter with a ledger open in front of him, which was either actual bookkeeping or the appearance of it while he waited. Everett came in. Desmond looked at him over his glasses. You're alive. Increasingly, yes, and... Everett sat down on the stool by the counter. Told him about Yount, about the name, about the afternoon in the camp and what Tohono had said about the elders deciding. Desmond listened. When Everett got to Peton Hale's name, Desmond's expression did something complicated. You're sure, Desmond said. Yount said it. Yount is a man trying to stay out of a noose, yes. And he knew exactly who would be checking whether what he said was true. He's not going to lie about a name I can verify. Desmond took his glasses off, rubbed his eyes, put them back. Peton Hale has been in this territory for 12 years. He's got a contract with the Territorial Land Office. He's got the ear of 3 federal officials I know of personally. I know. Taking him to court is not going to be simple. I know that too. Everett looked at him steadily. I'm not doing this because I think it'll be simple. Desmond looked at the ledger, at the lamp, at Everett. What do you need from me? I need you to go to Judge Whitmore in Socorro, not Cobb's contact, not the county circuit. Federal. Whitmore has a reputation for actual jurisprudence. He's also 2 days' ride. Then you should leave early. Desmond stared at him. I'm 58 years old, I know. My back has opinions about 2 days in the saddle. Your back's going to have opinions about a lot of things if Hale keeps operating without consequence. Long pause. You're very good at this, Desmond said, not admiringly. More like someone identifying a trait. At what? At making it sound like there's only one reasonable option. I don't make things sound like anything, Everett said. I just describe what's actually there. Desmond looked at him for another moment. Then he closed the ledger. I'll leave it first light, he said. I'll take the Alcott name into Whitmore's office and hope that still means something. He paused. It should. His wife bought her wedding dress from my mother's store in 1861. I'm going to rely heavily on that, whatever works. Also, Desmond pointed. That cord. Take it off before you walk around town. People are already talking about the Apache riding in this morning. You show up wearing that. It'll be a conversation you don't have time for. Everett looked down at the cord. Thought about it. Left it where it was. Desmond shook his head. Stubborn. She used to call it selective hearing, Everett said. I only listened to the part of an argument that agreed with me. She was right, usually was. He ate supper at the one place in Cobrefs that served a hot meal after 6. A narrow room behind the barber shop run by a woman named Clara Finch, who cooked simple food extremely well and asked no questions, which was a combination Everett had always found restful. He ate paid, rode back to the ranch. The cabin was as he'd left it, quiet. The photograph on the table, the lamp he'd forgotten to extinguish that morning now burned very low. He topped it up. Sat down, picked up the photograph. Interesting week, he said to Martha's photograph, which he did sometimes. Not because he thought she could hear him, just because some conversations didn't have another good address. He told her about Tohono, about Chayton, about the little girl who'd watched him work on the horse's hoof with that devastating 5-year-old focus. About Peton Hale's name sitting in Briggs Yount's mouth like something he'd needed to spit out. He told her about the cord, about what Tohono had said when he gave it. He told her that he wasn't sure if any of this was going to work, that the judge might be compromised, that Tohono's elders might decide the risk wasn't worth it, that Hale had more resources and more connections, and more people willing to do whatever he needed than Everett had anything. He told her he was going to try anyway. And because she was Martha, and even in memory she was more honest than comfortable, the answer he imagined her giving was not, "Of course it'll work, or you'll be fine," but something closer to, "Well, at least you'll be able to sleep." He looked at Thomas in the photograph. At that interrupted smile. "I know, kid," he thought. "Me too." He blew out the lamp. He was back in the canyon, before the sun had fully cleared the eastern ridge. Tohono was waiting for him, standing outside the main shelter, with Chayton beside him and two of the senior warriors he'd noticed the night before. The elders, maybe. Or close to it. The camp was quieter this early. Just starting up, Everett dismounted, walked to them. Tohono studied him for a moment, the way he always did, like he was checking something. "We talked through the night," Tohono said. "I know. I'm sorry for what I'm asking." "Don't be sorry," Tohono said. "We are not sorry for things we choose freely." He paused. "We have decided." Everett waited. "We will come," Tohono said. "Chayton and I and two warriors who were there when the horses were taken. We will speak in your court. We will say what we saw." Another pause. "But I want something understood before we do this. Tell me. When we walk into that building, we are not asking for permission. We are not begging for justice. We are demanding it. As people who have the same right to it as anyone." He met Everett's eyes. "If the court does not give it, we walk out. We do not beg. We do not perform gratitude for being allowed in the room." "Understood," Everett said. "Completely." Tohono nodded. Then he did something unexpected. He put out his hand, not the Apache way, the other way, deliberate, choosing it, extending across the distance, gripped it. The handshake was brief, firm, the kind that meant something. "Cowboy Flats," Tohono said. "How many days?" "Desmond is writing for the judge today. Probably a week before things are in place." "1 week." Tohono released his hand. "Then we will be there." He turned to go back inside. "Tohono," Everett said. The chief stopped. "Your brother's horse. How is she?" Something shifted in Tohono's shoulders. A very small thing. The particular way a person's body changes when something that had been braced suddenly isn't. "She slept beside my shelter last night," he said. "Chose to. No one put her there." He went inside. Everett stood there for a moment. Then Chayton, who had been standing through all of this with his arms crossed and his jaw set, made a sound that was almost involuntary. "Like something escaping." "She used to do that," Chayton said, "when his brother was alive." Every night, he walked away before Everett could respond, which was fine. Some things didn't need a response. Everett mounted Hannibal and turned south a week. 1 week to get a federal judge to Cowboy Flats. 1 week to make sure Briggs Yount was still talking and still in one sac meese. 1 week before Peton Hale would find out that the plan he'd paid for had turned completely inside out. Everett rode. The desert stretched out on every side. Vast. Indifferent. Beautiful. In the way things are beautiful when they don't care whether you think so or not. Somewhere behind him in the canyon, a horse was sleeping beside a dead man's shelter. Choosing to be there because some connections don't break just because the person at the other end of them is gone. Everett thought he understood something about that. He touched the cord at his neck, kept riding. The week moved slow the way weeks do when you're waiting for something that could go either direction. When every morning you wake up and do the arithmetic again. All the ways it could work, all the ways it couldn't. And the arithmetic never comes out clean because it isn't that kind of problem. Everett fed his cattle. Repaired the section of fence the mare had tangled in. He'd been meaning to do it for a month, and now he did it with particular attention, replacing not just the cut wire, but 3 posts that had gone soft at the base. He worked methodically, carefully. The way a man works when he needs his hands occupied so and doesn't eat itself. He rode into Cowboy Flats every morning to check on Briggs Yount. Still there, still breathing, still in possession of the information that could bring Peton Hale down. That last part worried him most. Hale was not a stupid man. Hale had gotten this far, had built this much, By being exactly the kind of smart that never showed its work. The kind that moved through problems before problems fully formed. The kind that made things disappear quietly rather than noisily. Briggs Yount was a problem. And Everett had been around enough of the world to know what happened to problems that men like Hale needed to make disappear. He talked to Reed Cobb on the third day, stood in the sheriff's office with his hat in his hands, and made the case plainly. Yount was a material witness in a federal matter. He needed to be in that cell when Desmond came back with a judge. He needed to be in that cell with all his information still intact. Cobb listened, scratched his beard, made the face he made when he was being asked to do something inconvenient. "You're telling me to watch him special," Cobb said. "I'm telling you someone may try to stop him from talking." "Who?" "The person he's talking about." Cobb went still. "You think Pemberton Hale is going to?" "I think Pemberton Hale is going to do whatever Pemberton Hale needs to do," Everett said. "I think he's been doing exactly that for 12 years and nobody's stopped him yet. And I think he still believes this whole thing is manageable. He doesn't know yet about Tohono. He doesn't know Apache are coming to testify. Right now he thinks his only problem is one drifter in a jail cell who might talk." He paused. "So yes. Watch Yount's special." Cobb looked at him for a long moment. "You are making my life very complicated," Cobb said. "I know. I am not a brave man. You told Desmond that. I stand by it." "I'm not asking you to be brave," Everett said. "I'm asking you to do your job for more days. That's all." Cobb looked at the floor, at the ceiling. "At somewhere that was neither. I'll put Garrett on nights," he said finally. "Boy's useless for most things, but he's awake at 3 in the morning, which is more than I can say for myself. That's all I need." On the fourth day he went back to the canyon, not because Tohono had asked him to, because the horse needed checking. That was a real thing. That was not an excuse, except maybe it was a little bit of an excuse. The hoof had healed well. He looked at it in the morning light, crouched in the corral while the horse stood patient. And Chayton watched from a few feet away with his arms crossed. "Good," Everett said. "She can work tomorrow." Chayton said nothing. Then, "Why do you know so much about horses? Spent years tracking in rough country. Horse goes lame out there, you're in trouble. Learned to fix things before they needed fixing." Silence. "My father was the same," Chayton said, very quietly. He said a man who cannot care for his horse cannot care for his family. Everett looked up at him. Chayton was not looking back. He was looking at the horse. "He sounds like someone worth knowing," Everett said. Chayton's jaw moved. He was. They stayed like that for a moment, the horse breathing between them. The morning going gold on the canyon walls. "I need to tell you something," Chayton said. "All right. The night I came into your shelter," he stopped. "Started again. I was not going to do it. I want you to know that." Everett stood up slowly, looked at him directly. "I was so angry," Chayton said. "For days I had been so angry that I could not sleep, could not eat, and you were there, a white man in our camp. And I thought..." He stopped again. Something happening in his face that was trying to be controlled and wasn't quite managing it. "I thought if I could just do something, anything, the anger would be less. And then, you came in and sat there," Everett said.
"And you didn't do anything?"
"No, you just looked at me." "Yes." Chayton was quiet. "My father used to say that the bravest thing a man can do is stay still when every part of him wants to run or fight." A pause. "I thought he meant in battle. He might have meant it everywhere." Everett said. Chayton looked at him, direct. "For the first time without the edge, I will be there," he said, "in the court. I will say what I saw." Everett nodded. "I know, thank you. Don't thank me short. Not unkind, just precise. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because my father's name deserves to be said in that room. Because the man responsible deserves to hear it." "I know that too," Everett said. Something settled between them, not friendship, not yet. Something quieter than friendship and maybe more durable. The particular thing that forms between people who have sat in the same hard place and come out of it without pretending it was easy. Everett picked up his bag. walked back to Hannibal. Chayton didn't say goodbye, but he raised one hand as Everett rode out. Brief, almost nothing. Everett raised one back. Desmond came back on the 5th day, riding harder than Everett had ever seen the man ride, which was still not particularly fast, but had a quality of genuine urgency that was new. He pulled up outside the general store and climbed down with the careful movement of a man whose back had been making strong statements for 48 hours. "Well," Everett said. "Judge Whitmore is coming," Desmond said. He was breathing through his nose in the way of someone managing discomfort. 4 days. "He's bringing a federal marshal," Everett exhaled. Something in his chest that had been tight for a week went slightly less tight. "How did you manage that?" "I told him the truth," Desmond said, which apparently is a very unusual approach in territorial legal affairs. He handed Hannibal's reins to Everett and started walking stiffly toward the store door. "I told him Briggs Yount had named Peton Hale in connection with the murder of 2 Apache men and the theft of horses used to provoke conflict and justify land seizure. I told him Apache witnesses were willing to testify." He paused at the door. That last part made him put his coffee down. I imagine it did. He said it was either the most credible thing he'd heard in 10 years on the bench or the strangest. Desmond pushed the door open. He also said if it was the strangest, he wanted to see it anyway. "That'll do," Everett said, inside. Desmond dropped into his chair behind the counter, with the specific gratitude of a man reunited with a piece of furniture he'd been missing. 4 days, Everett said. "Hale doesn't know yet. Hale will know within the day," Desmond said. "Information moves in this territory. Someone at Whitmore's office, someone on the road, someone somewhere." He looked at Everett. 4 days is when it gets dangerous. I know. You need to. I know." Desmond looked at him. "You've been thinking about this the whole week," and Everett sat on the stool. "Hale has 3 options when he finds out. He runs. He fights. Or he tries to make the evidence disappear before it gets to court. Running means losing everything he's copied here. Yes, fighting means going up against a federal judge. Also not ideal, so he goes after the evidence." Desmond said. "He goes after Yount," Everett said. "Or he tries to convince Tohono that coming to court is more dangerous than staying away." Desmond went quiet. "Can he do that?" Desmond said. "The second one. He can try. Hale has traders who work the Apache routes. He has people who go back and forth. If he sends someone up there with a convincing enough message, would Tohono believe it? Tohono is not a man who trusts easily." Everett paused. "But he's also a man who has been given reasons for that distrust for a very long time. If someone comes with a story that confirms what he already has reason to expect." He stopped. Desmond was watching him. "What are you going to do?" Desmond said. "I'm going to go back up there," Everett said. "And I'm going to tell Tohono exactly what I just told you about Hale's options, about who might be coming, with what kind of message. I'm going to give him the information and let him decide what to do with it. That's all. That's all I can do. I can't make his decisions for him. I can tell him the truth and trust him to handle it." Desmond looked at him for a moment. "You trust him?" Everett thought about it, honestly, not the quick answer. "Yes," he said, "I do." Desmond made a sound, not quite a laugh. 12 days ago you didn't know this man existed. 12 days ago, I also had a stolen horse and no idea what I was going to do about it. And now I'm going to go warn him," Everett said. He stood up. "And then I'm going to come back and make sure Briggs Yount is still in one piece. And still talking." He walked to the door. "Everett," Desmond said. He stopped. "Be careful. Please," a pause. "I meant what I said about funerals." Everett looked back at him. "I know you did." He went out into the afternoon sun. He rode fast this time, not recklessly, but with purpose. The particular pace of someone who understood that time had become a variable they couldn't afford to waste. The canyon markers went past, the narrow passages, the red walls. He came into the camp at a speed he hadn't used before. Not frantic, but faster than he'd arrived either previous time, and the camp read the difference. Warriors appearing at the edges. Hands moving toward weapons. He stopped, raised both hands, visible. One of the warriors recognized him, said something to the others. The tension shifted slightly. Tohono came out, looked at Everett. At the way he was sitting the horse. Read it. Something has changed, Tohono said. The judge is coming in 4 days, Everett said. And when Hale finds out, he's going to try to stop it. He said the rest of it quickly. Hale's options. The likelihood that someone would try to reach the camp before the trial. The importance of not letting a stranger's message undo what they'd decided. Tohono listened. His face was doing the thing it did when it was processing at full speed, while showing very little on the surface. You think he will send someone to frighten us away, Tohono said. Or to offer something. A deal. Land access. Money. Something that looks better than a courtroom, with an uncertain outcome. Tohono made a sound. He thinks we can be bought. Men like Hale think everyone can be bought, Everett said. Because everyone in his world can be. We cannot, I know that. But you came to warn us anyway. Because the message might be convincing. It might use real fears. Everett met his eyes. I'm not warning you because I think you'll fold. I'm warning you because you deserve to see what's coming before it arrives. Tohono studied him. Then, he said, get down off your horse. Come inside. They sat for 2 hours. Tohono, Everett, Chaitin, 2 of the senior warriors, and a man Everett hadn't spoken with before, older than Tohono, smaller, with eyes that had the particular quality of someone who had been paying attention to everything for a very long time. Tohono called him Nakai. Didn't explain further. Later, Chaitin would tell him quietly that Nakai had been the one who negotiated the last treaty, the one that got broken inside of a year. That Nakai had shaken hands with 3 different government men who each promised the same thing and delivered none of it. That he had come today anyway. Said more than most people would understand. And Nakai said nothing through most of the meeting. Just listened, watched. Once or twice nodded at something, and when he did, Tohono noticed it. They talked through every scenario, what Hale might try, through whom, what it might look like, how to recognize a false offer, what to do if someone came to the camp in the next 4 days with a message. Nakai spoke at the end, in Apache. Slowly, Tohono translated. He says, we have been deciding for ourselves what is right for a very long time. We do not need guidance on how to handle a man who thinks we are simple. He paused. He also says, the fact that you came to warn us rather than assuming we would handle it is the reason he trusts. Everett looked at the old man. Nakai was looking back at him with those ancient, attentive eyes. Tell him I appreciate that, Everett said. And that I hope I'm worth it, Tohono translated. Nakai listened, then made a short sound, something dry and amused. Tohono almost smiled. He says, we will know in 4 days. He got back to Cowboy Flats at midnight, rode straight to the sheriff's office. Garrett was on duty. The deputy was awake, as promised, playing cards against himself with the focused concentration of someone who had been alone for 8 hours and had run out of other options. Yount, Everett said in the cell. Sleeping, Garrett looked up. Had a visitor earlier. I turned him away. Everett went still. What kind of visitor? Said he was Yount's cousin. Wanted to bring him some food. Garrett shrugged. I told him prisoner meals were handled by the county. Man argued. I asked him to leave. He did. What did he look like? Garrett described him. The clothes were too good for a man who claimed to be a drifter's cousin. The horse at the rail was too expensive. Hale's man, already. Within hours of Desmond getting back. Next time anyone comes, Everett said, you send for me. It's the middle of the night. Send for me anyway. Garrett looked at him, then at the cord around his neck, then back at his face. Whatever he saw there was apparently sufficient. All right, Garrett said. All right, 3 days. 3 days of managing variables that kept trying to become unmanageable. Cobb quietly doubled the watch on the jail. Everett rode between the ranch and town and the canyon in a rotation that left him with 4 hours of sleep most nights. Desmond prepared affidavits. gathered the written records he had, went through his memory of the transaction he'd witnessed with the focus of a man who understood that his word was going to need to stand up to a lawyer. On the second day, Hale showed up in town, in person, which was either arrogance or calculation or both. He was exactly what Everett had expected, 60 or near it, well-dressed without being flashy about it. The kind of man who had learned a long time ago that power didn't need to announce itself. He had a lawyer with him. A young man with an expensive coat and the smooth face of someone who'd spent his career making unpleasant things look reasonable. Hale walked into the sheriff's office like he owned it. Everett was there. They looked at each other across the small room. Hale's eyes went to the cord at Everett's neck. Something moved across his face, not fear exactly. The recognition of an unexpected variable. "Mr. Calhoun," Hale said. Like he'd known exactly who he'd find here. Like he'd been briefed. "Mr. Hale." The lawyer was already talking. Something about the charges being based on the unreliable testimony of a known drifter. Something about jurisdictional questions. Something about the unforeseen complications of using parties without legal standing as witnesses. Everett didn't look at the lawyer, he looked at Hale. And Hale, who had spent a long career looking at men and understanding immediately where the leverage was and how to apply it, looked back at Everett and found something he wasn't accustomed to finding. Nothing to press on. Not fear, not ambition, not debt or desire or the particular hunger of someone who wanted something Hale could provide. Just a man who had already decided, who had passed through his own fire and come out the other side of it and didn't especially need anything Pemberton Hale had to offer. "I want you to understand something," Hale said. Still smooth, still controlled. "What you're doing here has consequences. Not just for the trial, for the relationships you're damaging, for your standing in this community, for the future of your property." He paused. "A man alone on 40 acres in contested territory needs friends." "Mr. Calhoun, I have friends," Everett said. "You have an Apache chieftain who'll be gone from this territory within the year when the army moves through. And a shopkeeper." A pause. "That's not going to be enough." Everett looked at him for a long moment. "You killed 2 young men," Everett said. "You didn't pull the trigger yourself. You never do. But you paid for it. You set it in motion. And those 2 men had families, and their families have been living with that hole since it was made." He paused. "I'm not interested in your assessment of my friends or my property. I'm interested in seeing you answer for what you did. That's all." Hale's jaw tightened. Just slightly. The lawyer was still talking. Something about reasonable negotiation. Something about everyone's interests being served by a measured approach. Cobb, who'd been sitting at his desk through all of this with the expression of a man watching a weather event he hoped would move past, finally cleared his throat. "Mr. Hale," Cobb said. "My office. Not the place for this conversation." Hale looked at Cobb, at Everett, at the cord one more time. He left. The lawyer left after him, still talking, to no one in particular, because that was apparently what he'd been hired to do. The door closed. Cobb exhaled. Long. He's going to make this as ugly as he can. Yes, his lawyer is going to argue. Apache testimony can't be admitted. I know, can it? Everett thought about it. Federal court. Judge Whitmore's discretion. I don't know for certain. But I know what it looks like when 4 people walk into a room and tell a coherent, consistent story about what they saw. He paused. And I know what it looks like when a man's own paid associate has written down his name and the amount of money that changed hands. Cobb looked at him. That paper Yount had, it's in my saddlebag right now. Has been since Desmond brought it from the jail. He met Cobb's eyes. Seemed safer there than in an evidence drawer that Hale might have access to. Cobb blinked. You took. I made a copy. The original is with a federal postal agent in Socorro. Desmond arranged it before he came back. Long pause. You've been doing this for a week, Cobb said. Yes, planning all of it. Trying to. Cobb shook his head. And here I thought you were just a rancher who did something foolish with a horse. I was, Everett said. Everything else came after. Judge Whitmore arrived on the morning of the fourth day. He was not what Cowboy Flats expected. They expected a large man, a commanding presence. Someone who looked like the idea of federal authority made physical. What came off the stage was a compact man of 60, with wire-rimmed glasses and a coat that had seen better decades, and the no-nonsense air of someone who had been dispensing justice in difficult places for long enough that very little impressed him anymore. He had a federal marshal with him, tall, quiet, the kind of quiet that suggested substantial capability. Whitmore walked into Cobb's office, looked around, looked at Cobb, at Desmond, at Everett. "Mr. Calhoun," he said. "Judge, Mr. Alcott tells me you have Apache witnesses." "I do. Where are they?" "They'll be here tomorrow morning." Whitmore looked at him over his glasses. "You're sure of that?" Everett thought about Tohono, about the handshake at the corral, about Nakai's dry amusement and Chayton's single raised hand. "I'm sure," he said. Whitmore considered him. Whatever he saw was apparently satisfactory, or at least not disqualifying. "We'll convene at 9 tomorrow," he said. "Mr. Alcott's store has the largest open room. We'll use it." He paused. "I've reviewed the deposition, the documentary evidence, and I've reviewed Mr. Hale's lawyer's filing, which arrived this morning by fast rider, which tells me several things." "What? What things?" "It tells me Peton Hale is extremely motivated to stop this proceeding, which tells me he believes it will succeed." Whitmore took his glasses off, cleaned them with a cloth, put them back. "In my experience, guilty men work harder than innocent ones. The innocent ones tend to believe the truth will sort itself out. The guilty ones know better." He went into the back room to review papers. Desmond looked at Everett. "Tomorrow," Desmond said. "Tomorrow," Everett said. That night he rode up to the canyon one more time. Not because there was anything practical left to discuss. Just because he wanted Tohono to know he was there, that the morning was still the plan, that nothing had changed. He found the camp quieter than usual, not tense. The particular quiet of people who have made a decision and are resting in it. Not anxious, not second-guessing. Rididi. Tohono was sitting outside his shelter, alone, looking at the stars. Everett dismounted, sat nearby. Didn't say anything immediately. The stars over Arizona were not subtle. They were enormous and specific, and they went on forever, in a way that did something to a person's sense of proportion. Made the things that had felt large feel appropriately sized, my brother used to say, Tohono said. Without looking at him, that stars are the fires of everyone who came before, everyone who already made it through. Everett looked up at them. "That's a better story than the ones I was told." "What stories were you told?" "That they were balls of burning gas a very long way away." Tohono made the dry, quiet sound that was his version of a laugh. "Also possibly true. Martha liked your version better," Everett said. "She would have, anyway." Tohono looked at him then. "You talk about her often, in my head." "Mostly." He paused. "She had opinions about everything, strong ones, expressed clearly. I spent 20 years with someone like that. Now I'm alone, and the opinions still come. I just have to supply both sides of the conversation." "Thomas," Tohono said. "Your son." "Yes, what was he like?" Everett was quiet for a moment. Not because it was hard to answer, because he was selecting. Choosing the thing that was most true. "He was curious about everything," he said finally. "Nothing was too small to be interesting to him. Rocks, bugs, the way water moved. He used to ask me questions I didn't have answers to, and then look at me like he was sincerely puzzled that I didn't know." A pause. "He was going to be something, I don't know what, but something." Tohono nodded. "My son," he said. "He was 17. He was learning to be a healer. He had gentle hands." He paused. "Army patrol. Wrong place. Wrong time. Not even intentional, I think. Just careless." Another pause. "Careless is sometimes worse than deliberate. At least deliberate knows what it is." They sat with that for a while. The fires of the people who came before, burning overhead, or balls of burning gas a very long way away. Both things possibly true at once. "Tomorrow," Everett said. "Tomorrow," Tohono said. He put his hand out. Everett shook it. held it for a moment, let go. He rode back down to the flat, dark land. They came at sunrise, before the town was fully awake, before most people had their coffee or their lamps lit, or any particular expectation of what the morning was going to bring. Tohuno, Chaitin, two warriors who had been there at the hunting ground when the attack happened, and Nakai, who had not been announced as coming and was simply there, sitting straight on a gray horse with those ancient eyes taking everything in. 5 Apache riding down the main street of Cobri Flats. Not creeping, not trying to be inconspicuous, riding straight and upright and unhurried in the early light. Like people who had every right to be exactly where they were, which they did. The town stopped, people on the boardwalk, miners heading for breakfast, women with baskets, a boy walking a dog who sat down and stared. Everyone just stopped and watched. No one ran, no one shouted. No one reached for anything, they just watched, because it was not a thing you saw. It was not a thing that had happened before, in this street, in this town, in this particular corner of a territory that had been built on the assumption that there were places and processes and rooms that belonged to some people and not to others. And here they came anyway. Everett was waiting at the entrance to Alcott's store. Tohuno rode up, looked down at him. There was something in his face that Everett hadn't seen before, not nerves exactly, the opposite of nerves. The quality of someone who has decided completely, who is done with the internal argument and is now simply doing the thing, Mr. Calhoun. Tohuno said. Tohuno. Everett looked at all of them. Thank you for coming. We are not here for you, Tohuno said, gently. Reminding, I know, Everett said. Thank you for coming anyway. Moved in Tohuno's face, he dismounted. The others did the same. They walked inside. The room was full. Desmond had arranged it as best he could. Chairs from the store and from the church 2 streets over, and from private homes. Because word had moved the way it always does, in small places, and every person within 5 miles who could find a reason to be in town that morning had found one. Whitmore was at the front, behind a table that had been Desmond's playfellow 12 hours ago. The federal marshal stood to one side. Hale's lawyer was already seated, with papers arranged in precise stacks, and a face that was working hard at neutral. Peton Hale sat beside his lawyer. He had dressed this morning in his finest. Everything correct. Everything the image of a man who belonged in rooms with authority and expected them to confirm it. He looked, when Tohuno and Chaitin and the others walked in, like a man who had been told to expect something and was now discovering that what he'd been told was accurate and didn't know what to do with that. He looked at Everett. Everett looked back, then looked away. Because Hale wasn't the point. He was just the end of a very long chain of choices and consequences. The last piece of the accounting, Whitmore called the room to order. Briggs Yount was brought in from the jail. He looked smaller in this room than he had in his cell. The bruising on his face had faded enough that he looked more like himself. He sat where he was directed and kept his eyes on the table in front of him. The lawyer made his arguments about admissibility, about the documentary evidence being foundational on the testimony of a self-interested party, about the unprecedented nature of the witnesses being called, about jurisdictional questions, about reasonable doubt, about all the careful words that exist specifically to make real things seem uncertain. Whitmore listened, made notes, asked 2 precise questions. Then he said, testimony will be heard. Objections to admissibility are noted for the record and denied. Hale's lawyer sat back. Something moving through his face that he controlled quickly. Yount testified first. He was not a compelling witness. He was a scared man doing math about his own survival. But the math came out clearly. The name, the date, the amount, the plan as he understood it, which was not the full plan, because men like Hale never gave anyone the full plan, but enough. The shape of it, the intent. Then Desmond Ho was, it turned out, an excellent witness, clear, specific, unhurried. He had the ledger with him. He had dates. He described what he'd seen in his store with the precision of a man who trusted his own memory and knew that the record would confirm it. Whitmore listened, made notes. Then he looked at Tohono. I understand, Whitmore said carefully, that you have testimony to offer. Tohono stood. He had been sitting with the particular stillness he was capable of. Now he stood, and it was the standing of someone who needed no permission to be upright. I do, he said. Please understand, Whitmore said, that this court recognizes your testimony and will weigh it with the same standards applied to all testimony given here today. Tohono looked at him. I did not come here to be recognized, he said. I came here to tell the truth about what happened to my people. Whitmore looked at him over his glasses. Something shifted in the judge's face. Very slightly. Respect. Maybe. Or the professional's recognition of someone who understood the room they were in. Then please do that, Whitmore said. Tohono spoke. He spoke slowly, clearly, not performing, not demonstrating, just saying what was true. The hunting party, the attack, the men killed. Their names, he said, their names. And Everett heard the room shift slightly when he did, because names made things real in a way that categories didn't. The horses taken, the painted mare, the 3 days of searching, the decision to follow her trail to white man's land, and what they had found when they got there. He looked at Hale once during the testimony. Just once. At the part where he said the names of the dead, Hale did not look back, which told you everything. Chayton went next. His English was rougher than Tohono's. More effort in it, but the effort made it somehow more powerful. Not because of difficulty, but because of what it meant. A young man reaching across a language that wasn't his to say something that mattered enough to do it anyway. He described the attack, what he saw, what he heard. He described his father's last moments with the directness of someone who had decided that looking away from it served no one. The room was very quiet while he spoke. The two warriors gave their accounts. Shorter. Detailed. The kind of detail that only people who were actually present can give. The specific things that can't be invented. Nakai sat through all of it without speaking. He had not been called. He had simply come. And his presence, that old, still attention, did something to the room that was harder to name than testimony, but was also in its way evidence. Hale's lawyer did his work. He asked Yount about prior convictions, about the money he might expect in exchange for cooperation. He questioned the reliability of Apache testimony. He introduced a deed, correctly filed, correctly signed, to a portion of the disputed land that predated the raid. He suggested the whole thing was a misunderstanding, coincidence, unfortunate but not criminal. He was good at his job, not good enough, because Whitmore was better at his. The judge asked Hale's lawyer to explain how a deed filed 6 months ago, connected to a plan allegedly formed 3 months ago. And when the lawyer tried to thread that needle, the thread broke. He asked Hale directly, did he know Briggs Yount? Hale said no. Whitmore held up the paper, the list, the name, the numbers. This document was retained by federal postal authorities in Socorro, he said. It was deposited there 10 days ago. Before any of these proceedings were announced, he looked at Hale. Your name is on it, Mr. Hale. Next to a sum of money. Next to a date that is 3 days before 2 men were killed. Hale looked at his lawyer. His lawyer said something quiet. Hale looked at Whitmore. And for the first time in what was probably a very long career of looking at rooms and owning them, Pemberton Hale had nothing. Not a response, not a redirection, not the smooth machinery of a man accustomed to making problems manageable. Just a man at the end of a chain of choices, sitting in a room full of people who knew exactly what those choices had cost. Whitmore's verdict came in the afternoon. He didn't make it complicated. Briggs Yount. Complicity in the murder of 2 persons and the theft of 4 horses. 8 years federal penitentiary. Eligible for reduced term, given cooperation with the court. Pemberton Hale. Conspiracy to commit murder. Conspiracy to provoke armed conflict through fraudulent means. Fraud in connection with federal land documentation. The sentencing would come from a higher court. But the binding over was immediate. The federal marshal put his hand on Hale's arm in the quiet, practiced way of someone who has done this many times. Hale did not resist. He went with the marshal in the same way a man goes when he has run all the way to the end of something and there's nothing left on the other side. The room exhaled. Everett sat very still for a moment. Then he looked over at where Tohono and Chayton were standing. Tohono was already looking at him, not triumphant, not relieved exactly, something quieter than both. The expression of a man who had done what he came to do and was now taking a moment to understand what that meant. Chayton was looking at the floor. His jaw was working, his hands were at his side. He was crying. Silently, the kind of crying a young man does when he's trying not to, and can't quite stop it and has decided that stopping it matters less than he thought it did. Everett looked away. Some moments were private even in public rooms. Some things you didn't watch. Outside in the afternoon light, the town had mostly filtered out of the makeshift courtroom, taking the story with it. By nightfall, it would be different versions of itself passed between 50 different mouths, gaining detail here, losing it there, becoming the kind of story that a place tells itself about what it is and what happened here once. Everett stood on the boardwalk. Tohono came out. Stood beside him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. It worked, Everett said. Eventually, this time, Tohono said, "This one man, this one case. Tomorrow there will be another." A pause. "You know that, yes. You know this does not fix what is broken, I know." Tohono looked out at the street, at the town that was going back to its ordinary business, at the boy whose dog had started walking again, at the woman with the basket who had gone back into whatever she was doing before the morning interrupted it. "But it is something," Tohono said. "Yes," Everett said. "It is." Chayton appeared at the door. He looked at Everett. His eyes were dry now. The working jaw was gone. What was there instead was something that hadn't been there a week ago. Something that might have been the beginning of a question he didn't have a name for yet. "My father's name was said in that room," Chayton said. "Yes, by the judge." "In the verdict?" "Yes." "It was in the record?" Chayton nodded slowly. "Good," he said. Like the word was heavier than it usually was. "That is good." He went back inside. Tohono watched him go. Something in his face that was very close to the expression of a man who has just seen a reason to keep going. "He will be all right," Tohono said. "In time." "Yes," Everett said. "I think he will." They left in the late afternoon, not announced. Not ceremonially, just the five of them mounting up in the street and riding north, and then they were gone, back into the canyon country, back into the landscape that was theirs, in a way that no deed or document would ever fully describe. Everett watched them go. Desmond came and stood beside him. Well, Desmond said, well, Everett said, "That was the strangest 2 weeks of my life." "Mine too." "And I've had some strange ones." Desmond was quiet for a moment. "Hale's holdings are going to be tied up in federal proceedings for years. His land office contracts will be reviewed." He paused. "Some of those canyons are going to now be left alone for a while." "Yes, not forever." "No, not forever." Everett looked at where the riders had gone. At the empty street going north, for a while, which was something. In a world that didn't offer forever, very often, a while was something real. Desmond patted him on the shoulder. Once. The particular pat of someone who didn't do that kind of thing a fun and was making an exception. "Go home, Everett," he said. "For once in this entire situation, go home and rest." He did. He rode home. Not thinking about Hale. Not thinking about the courtroom or the verdict or any of it. Thinking about a tin box of rocks under a boy's bed. Thinking that Thomas would have had opinions about every single one of these people. Strong opinions. Expressed clearly, he would have liked Tohono. Everett was almost certain of that. The ranch came into view low. Simple. 40 acres of hard ground that he'd chosen because it was far enough from everything that the quiet was real. And not just the absence of noise. He unsaddled Hannibal. Brushed him. Gave him water and grain. Stood in the barn doorway for a moment the way he often did, with the evening coming in and the first stars showing, and the land going from gold to gray to blue. He went inside. The photograph was on the table. Martha, Thomas, both of them the same as they'd always been. Fixed, perfect, real in a way that photographs can be and can't be simultaneously. He sat down, picked up the photograph. It worked, he said, quietly, to both of them, to neither of them. To the version of himself that still needed to say things out loud to know they were real. The judge came. Tohono came. Chayton said his father's name in that room, and the judge wrote it in the record. He paused. It's not enough. It won't fix everything that's broken. You know that. But it was. He stopped. He thought about what Tohono had said. But it is something. It was something, Everett said. A real something. He set the photograph down, blew out the lamp the next morning early, before full light. He went to get his horse and found it, on the fence post by the barn door, a haunch of venison freshly dressed, clean cut. Left with the kind of care that meant it had been set there by someone who understood the value of doing things properly. No tracks visible in the hard ground. No sign of who had been there, except that he knew. He stood and looked at it for a moment. At the gift that asked nothing in return. That was not a transaction. That was not gratitude exactly. Tohono had said they didn't operate on debt. It was something else. The acknowledgement of a bond. The practical language of a bond. The practical language of people who understood that some connections were expressed by showing up and doing something useful, rather than by finding the right words. He took it inside. He cooked it for breakfast. Then he went and got the beaded cord from around his neck. He'd been wearing it for 2 weeks, sleeping in it, working in it. It had become part of the landscape of himself that he didn't notice anymore, and he carried it inside. He looked at the wall beside the photograph of Martha and Thomas. He put a nail in the wall, hung the cord on it. He'd been thinking about where it belonged since the night before. Turns out the answer had been obvious all along. Martha's serious eyes, Thomas's interrupted smile, and the cord with its small beads and its carved stone. 3 things on a wall in a small cabin in Arizona Territory. In the fall of 1873, he stood there a while. Then he put on his hat. There was work to do. The south fence still needed reinforcing. The cattle needed moving to the lower pasture before the cold came properly. The winter was coming, and it didn't care about trials or verdicts, or the small, real, irreversible things that changed between people in the course of 2 weeks. He thought about Chayton saying, "My father's name was said in that room." He thought about Thomas and his rocks in the tin box. He thought that there might come a day, not soon, not easily, but somewhere down the line, when he would tell someone that story. About the horse in the wire, about the in the barn, about Tohono and Chayton, and the cord and the court and the venison left on a fence post before first light. He thought that Thomas would have wanted to hear it, would have sat very still and listened with that specific attention he had, and then asked questions that Everett wouldn't have answers to, and looked at him with that puzzled look. He thought he would have tried to answer them anyway. He went and saddled Hannibal. He rode out to check the south fence. The land was quiet and enormous and cold at the edges, and sky above it was the particular blue that means winter is deciding whether to arrive yet. Somewhere to the northwest in the canyons, fires were burning this morning too. People making it through another day. The same basic human project it had always been. Everett Calhoun rode his fence line. And for the first time in longer than he could accurately remember, he was not waiting for something. He was not dreading something. He was not carrying something so heavy it bent his spine and made the days something to get through, rather than something to be in. He was just here on his land. In the morning, and that was enough, more than enough. It was. In fact, everything. Somewhere to the northwest, a painted mare was standing in a corral, choosing still to sleep beside a dead man's shelter. Some things, Everett thought, know where they belong before the people around them do.